Welcome back to Never Enough Novels. I'm wrapping up my June reads with short and sweet book reviews of every single book that I read in the month. I'm going to try and keep these reviews to maybe a minute or less, so they're just quick hits so you can decide whether this book is worth it or not for you. I'll go over my star rating, what I quickly thought about the book, and ultimately whether I'd recommend it or not. For once, I didn't actually make any notes for this video. I just wrote down who the characters are from the books because that's one thing I absolutely will not remember from any book that I read. I could have just finished a book and I will not be able to tell you who the main characters are. So outside of that, we're flying off the cuff a little bit today. I'm going to put the links to all of these books down below in the description so you can grab them from Amazon or Target, and it helps support this channel. I earn a small commission and it's no extra cost to you, so that goes a long way in helping to keep this YouTube channel and this podcast running. Plus, make sure you hit like on this video or subscribe on YouTube or follow along on my podcast so you can get all of my book recommendations first. Let's dive right in. I'm gonna just go in order of when I finished these books, so starting with the ones that I finished at the beginning of June and working my way up to the most recent books. So first up is Silver Elite by Dani Francis. You might have seen I posted an entire book review dedicated to this book on my channel because I had a lot of thoughts. I ultimately gave this one 2 stars because I had a lot of problems with it. It felt like it was written by someone who had just read, Fourth Wing and Hunger Games and tried to pick and choose different plot points and include them in their own book. And there's a lot of controversy with this one because no one knows who the author actually is. They were using a pen name. Some people say it was written by AI or maybe a different famous author who wanted to try a new genre, but ultimately whoever it was did not do a good job. The writing was really trite and there were a lot of cliche phrases or repetitious phrases throughout the book. It was entertaining enough that I finished it, but definitely not one that I would recommend. Next up is Problematic Summer Romance by Ali Hazelwood. This is a contemporary romance and it's a sequel to one of her books, Not in Love, because it has 2 of the side characters from that book. But I honestly didn't remember almost anything about them, and I still gave this 4.5 stars. This is an age gap romance between Maya, who's in her mid-20s, and Connor, who's in his late 30s, and the book takes place over the course of a week in Italy at Maya's brother's wedding. And we get glimpses, though, back and forth between current day and also the development of Maya and Connor's friendship and then ultimately sort of relationship over the past 3 years. And this was just so incredibly well written. I love that Ali Hazelwood didn't shy away from some of the problems that obviously come up with this big of a difference in their ages, but she tackled it head on, and I was so emotionally invested in these 2 that they're easily going to become one of my favorite couples of 2025. I highly recommend this romance. It would be really fun for summer because it's set mostly in Italy, and even if you don't normally do age gap romances or it seems like a lot, it's still absolutely worth reading, and it's so well handled that I highly recommend this. Then we've got A Fate Forged in Fire by Hazel McBride. This originally popped up on my radar because it's fantasy, it has dragons, and it's inspired by Celtic history. I ultimately gave this one 3.5 stars, though. It didn't blow me away as much as I was hoping it would. I honestly wanted more dragons in the story, and I think kind of building up that hype a little bit made it ultimately a bit of a letdown when they didn't play as big of a part as I was hoping. But it features like a very female forward story. So our main character is Amira, and she is a princess who has kind of been exiled and forced to hide her identity, and she's waiting for an opportune moment to retake over her throne. And then there is an enemies to lovers romance with Fiorian, who is the current prince of their realm. There was a lot of world building in this one, and I kept honestly referencing the map and trying to go back and figure out who was who and what these territories were, and I think that also contributed to making it feel a little bit more of a slog and not as fast-paced as some other fantasies I read. So if you're interested in some dragons or definitely that Celtic aspect, that was very well included in this book, so I did like that fact, but there were just a few things that brought this down to 3.5 stars for me. So I'd recommend it if any of those things sound particularly interesting, but if you don't need another dragon fantasy in your life, then you can skip this one. Next up is The Ghost Writer by Julie Clark, and I recently discovered Julie Clark because I read her book The Last Flight earlier this year. I just happened to pick it up at the library, and I was thrilled to see that her book The Ghost Writer was included as a Book of the Month selection, and it's one of probably the hottest new thrillers of the year, and I gave it 4 stars. I didn't like it quite as much as The Last Flight, but I did think it was a really well-written book. So it focuses on Olivia, who is a ghost writer, and she gets this assignment. She's kind of desperate desperate for work right now to tell the story of a famous horror writer who is finally ready to reveal what happened in his childhood when two of his siblings were murdered. So for most of his life, Vincent has been kind of accused or thought of as the person who might have murdered his siblings, but he was officially cleared. He's just kind of had this lingering suspicion hanging over him his whole life. And Vincent is Olivia's dad. So she's been estranged from her father for a very long time, but takes this kind of last-ditch job because she needs the money and works with Vincent to finally understand what happened that night all those years ago. So the story is told in dual timelines where we're taken back to the 1970s, where Vincent and his siblings each get chapters to describe what's been happening in that town and at that time. And then we have present day where Olivia is trying to uncover the truth with her father. Vincent is also battling dementia, so he's a little bit of an unreliable narrator in the present tense. And ultimately, this was very thematic, and I thought Julie did a great job setting the scene, especially back in the 1970s, to get a feel for what it was like in the town at the time. And the way the story came together and the ultimate reveal about what actually went down that led to the murders of these two teenagers back then was very satisfying. So ultimately, it was more of a slow burn thriller as we kind of pulled together the pieces of what happened back then, but I really enjoyed it overall. I typically gravitate towards more fast-paced, page-turning thrillers, so that's the only reason I gave this 4 stars instead of 4.5 or 5, but ultimately I would still recommend this. Next up is The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. So this is the second book in the Pumpkin Spice Cafe series that was really popular kind of last year and the beginning of this year. And these have really cutesy covers, but there's actually more spice in these romance books than I expected. So I've been listening to them on audio because I kind of wanted to give them a try and see if they lived up to the hype. Ultimately, this one was only 3.5 stars for me, which I think is the same as what I rated the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. So they're solid small town romances, but they're definitely not as well written or not as captivating as some other romance books that I've read. So I think I had a little bit higher expectations based on all of the hype surrounding them versus, how much I actually enjoyed the book. This one specifically features Hazel, who helps run a bookstore in town, and Noah, who is kind of known as the playboy, but has always had a special interest in Hazel. And they work together over the summer to sort of help bring Hazel out of her shell and find more enjoyment in life as she's about to turn 30. So she kind of has this bucket list of things that she wants to do. But again, if you're specifically interested in small town romance, or if you want to know what all the hype is about with these books, maybe give them a try. But there's just so many other romance books that I would recommend instead, that this isn't going to be one that I say you absolutely have to read. Another fantasy I read this month was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I have had this on my TBR for ages, and I finally borrowed a copy from the library so I can dive into this series. It definitely started off slower than I was expecting, but really picked up as the book went on. So it's set in this, sci-fi world where we've colonized Mars, and our main character Darrow is part of the Reds. So the entire society is kind of separated by colors, and that determines your basically rank in society. The Reds are the lowest of the low, and Darrow specifically is working in a minor colony. Some things happen that change his situation though, and he has the opportunity to take his life in a whole different direction. And ultimately, I felt this novel really shined once he got into this kind of competition arena where we saw a lot of really interesting strategical thinking and plots and plans that were in place that he's come up with. And it really showed him as a character and how his brain works and why he has the ability to kind of change their entire society ultimately in the series. I gave this one 4 stars, but I've heard the series just keeps getting better and better, and it was almost more of a 3 to 3.5 stars at the beginning. We're creeping up to 4.5 stars by the end of the book because I was definitely flying through it by the end. So I am excited to keep going with this one, and I would recommend this series based on other reviews that I've heard and how excited I am to see where the story goes from here. Next up is Caught Up by Navessa Allen, and man, I have thoughts on this one as well. I adored Lights Out, which was the first book in this series, and is one of my all-time favorite reads. So I was really excited for Caught Up, but this one was only a 2-star read. So in Caught Up, we have different characters, which are Nico and Lauren. So I knew we weren't going to get the same exact humor that we got from Josh or all the same vibes as Lights Out, but I didn't have an issue with that. It was more that the writing felt very different and a lot more cliche and trite, and there was no emotional connection between these two. It was very physical, very steamy. There were just so many spicy scenes in this one that it felt like that was the entire focus of the book, rather than developing any sort of connection to the actual characters. And even when we were, talking with the characters, they mostly focused on each of their individual jobs. So Nico is part of the mafia, but he's desperately trying to get out, and Lauren is a cam girl and also part owner of like a kink club. So there's a lot of discussion about her work and the value there and some of the struggles that those type of workers individually face, which was great. And it was interesting to see how Nico was trying to get out of his work, where Lauren was trying to do even more with hers. But ultimately, for a romance, I just needed more of a connection between the two main characters. Plus, the last sentence of this book was one of the worst things that I've ever read. So it was a clear setup for the next book in the series, and like the two main characters who are going to be the next focus for the third book. Literally the last sentence was someone asking them, how did you two meet? And the guy's like, well, that's a longer story. And the book just ends. And like, I literally laughed out loud because I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. That was so cheesy and on the nose. And it just felt like the most ridiculous way to wrap up this super spicy book. And I just couldn't handle it. So I think everyone should read Lights Out, even if you don't normally like dark romance, and no one should read Caught Up. So I probably won't be continuing with the series because I just don't really trust her anymore as a writer. On the other note, a romance that I absolutely loved was called What Happens in Amsterdam by Rachel Lynn Solomon. And she is a more underrated writer, it seems. She does both young adult and adult romances, and I adore everything that she's written so far. Her adult romances are full of like the perfect amount of spice, there's a ton of great banter, and often some unique scenarios that you don't necessarily find in romances. So she'll take regular tropes, but put a bit of a spin on them. What Happens in Amsterdam features Danny, who is an American who is moving to Amsterdam as a way to kind of start fresh in her life. So she found a job over in Amsterdam, but after like 2 weeks, the startup company that she's with basically collapses and she's left trying to find a new job, or else she'll be kicked out of the country without a visa. She happens to literally run into Wouter, who had lived with them when they were in high school as an exchange student, and they had this romance back then, but it ended badly. So now they're kind of back in each other's lives unexpectedly. And she discovers that Wouter is also facing a problem. He needs to find a wife in order to inherit his childhood home. So they agree to get married and solve both of their problems at once. So Danny will get to stay in the country and Wouter will get to now live in his beloved childhood home. But even though their marriage is fake, they're now spending a lot of time together and they realize that the chemistry is definitely still between them. So this is a second chance romance, which I don't normally love these, but I really liked the way that this one was handled. And also Rachel herself recently moved to Amsterdam, so there are a ton of really genuine moments in this one that describe how beautiful the city is, what it's like to live there as someone who isn't native to the country, and some of probably the funny moments that she's experienced herself. So she really infused the book with a lot of local flavor, and it felt like I was living in the city and being in Danny's shoes herself. So that aspect just made me absolutely love this and put it over the top compared to other romances I've read. I gave this one 4.5 stars and I would definitely recommend it. Next up is another book that I gave 4.5 stars. It was called The Lost Book of First Loves by Rayanne Thane. And this is sort of romance, sort of women's fiction. It mostly focuses on two women, Allie and June. So Allie discovers that June is her half sister through one of those like DNA tests. So she decides to take a job as June's assistant to kind of get to know her a little bit before revealing the truth about their situation. And while she's there, June has a massive heart event or cardiac event, and Allie literally saves her life by doing CPR. So June has been told like she has to leave her high-powered job for a while to give her heart a break and kind of reset her life a little bit. So Allie offers up a chance to stay at her ranch in, I think it was Wyoming. So June agrees to it, and the two of them head back to the ranch. And while they're there, Allie's trying to, get to know June better and also figure out when is the best time to tell her about the fact that they are actually sisters. Each of them also gets their own little love stories, which I absolutely adored. And there was just as much focus on each of them growing personally with some of the situations they were facing in their life, as well as discovering more about each other and developing this friendship that, ultimately turned into sisterhood. The descriptions of the surroundings were beautiful, and the love stories were very sweet and charming. So it just had all of these elements that I really like from a book, like very heartwarming, a lot of found family and literal family. So this was a great, easy book for summer. One of the books that I'm just about to finish is called Carl's Doomsday Scenario by Matt Dinniman. This is the second book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which has been an absolute unexpected surprise this year for me. I had heard many people on Bookstagram talking about this series, and it's a weird like sci-fi / Dungeons and Dragons adventure book, but it is an absolute blast and one of the funniest series that I've ever read. So book 2 is very much in the same vein as book 1. I only have like maybe 50 pages left, so I'm planning to finish this today. But I know it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but these have been 5-star reads for me. And if you're at all interested in fantasy or kind of a role-playing adventure book, you definitely want to give these a try. And last up for June is another book that I recently finished. I listened to this one on audio. It was called Promise Me Sunshine by Cara Bastone. And she's one of those authors that I think I'm going to love every single thing that she writes. I recently read Ready or Not, I guess it was last year, by her. And she takes really tough topics that you don't normally find in romances and wraps them up in a way that is just so well done. So Ready or Not had an unexpected pregnancy, which is normally one of my least favorite tropes in romances, but it was a 5-star read for me. And in this one, we have a heavy dose of grief as our main character is struggling with the loss of her best friend recently. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. I loved it. Probably not quite as much as Ready or Not, but it was still a really good romance. So Lenny, as I said, is dealing with basically just struggling to survive after she lost her best friend, like basically her sister, since they were kids. And she takes a job nannying for this little girl and meets the little girl's uncle, Miles. And Miles recognizes something in Lenny that he's recently, or not recently, but I guess has gone through himself before. So he kind of takes Lenny under his wing and basically helps her achieve different items on her like live again list that she has. So he is the most attentive and sweet person in how he cares for Lenny in this period where she's struggling. And Lenny herself is just all over the place with her emotions. And the narrator specifically made this book incredible. She did such a good job showing and telling you like what it felt like to be in Lenny's shoes. So I really connected to this character because I listened to it on audio. So if you get a chance, I would definitely recommend this one on audio. But overall, this was a fantastic romance. It dealt with grief in a way that was both horrible and lighthearted, and it showed you, the full range of emotions that people can go through, and ultimately how Lenny learned to deal with her grief and find joy again with Miles and with the people that she met throughout the book. So that wraps up all 11 books that I read in June. Hopefully you enjoyed this short and sweet book review format so that you can quickly find out if these books are for you or not. Stay tuned next month for my next monthly reading wrap-up.